You owe me nothing, she said, her voice steady, almost gentle as the first bullet shattered the lantern outside the cabin and sent glass raining across the floor. That was the moment Ethan Cole realized redemption doesn't come quietly. It comes kicking down the door, loaded and angry, demanding a man decide who he truly is. The cabin stood alone at the edge of the Wyoming foothills, a crooked thing of pine logs and stubborn hope, surrounded by snow-dusted sage and a sky the color of old steel. Night pressed in from all sides. Wind howled like a warning. And somewhere beyond the trees, horses snorted and men whispered with the patience of predators. Inside, the air smelled of lamp oil, cold wood, and fear held tightly in the chest. Ethan stood near the hearth, his right hand hovering close to the Colt at his hip. His coat was worn thin at the elbows, his boots scarred by too many miles and too many mistakes. A long, pale line ran from his temple to his jaw, an old reminder of the man he used to be. Across the room, Clara Bennett loaded the rifle with calm, practiced hands. She was a widow, though she wore it like armor rather than grief. Her dark hair was pinned back, her face pale but resolute. Years ago, the frontier had taken her husband and left her with a broken ranch, a stubborn heart, and a child asleep in the loft above them, too young to understand why gunfire meant the end of childhood. You shouldn't have come back here, Clara said softly, sliding the rifle into place by the window. They'll burn this cabin to the ground just to make a point. Ethan swallowed. I didn't come for safety. He'd come because running had finally grown heavier than staying. 2 days earlier, the town of Red Hollow had been buzzing like a hornet's nest. The Caldwell gang was riding north, 6 men with blood on their boots and a bounty on Ethan Cole's head. Once, Ethan had ridden with them. Once, he'd believed survival justified everything. Then he'd seen a boy die screaming in the dust of a botched robbery, and something inside him had broken clean in half. Clara had been the first person to offer him water instead of judgment when he stumbled onto her land months ago, half-frozen and near death. She never asked where he came from, never asked what he'd done. She just pointed to the fire and said, "Sit. You look like a man who's tired of carrying ghosts." Now those ghosts were outside, loading rifles. A shot cracked through the night, thudding into the cabin wall. Snow shook loose from the roof beams. "They won't stop," Ethan said. "Not while I'm breathing." "That's their sin to carry," Clara replied. "Not mine. Not yours anymore." He looked at her, then really looked, at the strength in her eyes, at the tremor she refused to let reach her hands, at the kind of courage that didn't come from a gun, but from love. "You have a child," Ethan said quietly. "I won't make him pay for my past." Clara met his gaze. "My son already lives in a world that takes without asking. If you walk out there, they'll kill you slow and they'll still come for us." Another bullet smashed the window frame, spraying splinters across the floor. The sound of men laughing drifted through the dark. Ethan's jaw tightened. For years, he'd believed he was beyond saving, that some lines, once crossed, stayed burned into the soul forever. But standing in that cabin, with gunfire closing in and a woman who believed he was more than his worst day, something fragile and dangerous stirred in his chest. Hope. He stepped toward the door. Clara caught his arm. "You don't owe me a thing," she said again. "Not your life, not your blood." "I know," Ethan replied. His voice was rough, but certain. "That's why I'm staying." Outside, a voice called his name, low, mocking, familiar. "Cole. We know you're in there. Come out nice, and we'll make it quick." Ethan pulled his arm free, and checked the revolver. The click of the cylinder loud in the small room. Above them, a floorboard creaked. Clara's eyes widened. No, a small shape appeared at the top of the ladder. The boy, barefoot, clutching a wooden horse. "Mama," he whispered, fear breaking through his sleep. Before either of them could move, the cabin door exploded inward under the force of a boot. Moonlight and gun barrels flooding the room. Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between the child and the men pouring in. And in that frozen heartbeat between the past that hunted him and the future that needed him, Cole made his choice. The cabin filled with smoke, moonlight, and shouting men. Ethan moved without thinking. He fired once clean, controlled, sending the lead man crashing backward into the snow. The report of the gun echoed through the trees like a thunderclap, and for a heartbeat everything froze. Then hell broke loose. Gunfire tore through the cabin walls. Wood splintered. Glass shattered. Clara grabbed her son and pulled him down behind the heavy oak table, wrapping her body around his small frame as if love alone could stop bullets. "Don't look," she whispered fiercely. "Whatever you hear, don't look." Ethan backed toward the hearth, firing only when he had to, each shot deliberate. He wasn't the reckless outlaw he'd once been, the man who sprayed lead and trusted luck. This was different. Every bullet now carried a name. Every second mattered. Outside, men shouted orders. "Circle the back. Set fire to the roof if you have to. He ain't walking out alive." Ethan's breath came hard. Smoke burned his lungs. Through a hole torn in the wall, he caught sight of flickering torchlight moving closer. They were going to burn the cabin. He glanced at Clara. She met his eyes and gave a single, small shake of her head. "Don't you dare." That was when he understood the truth he'd been running from. Redemption wasn't about surviving. It was about standing when it mattered. "Clara," he called softly between shots, "there's a root cellar out back. Trap door beneath the stove." Her eyes widened. "I can't." "You can," he said, "and you will." Another bullet slammed into the mantel inches from his head. "Take the boy," Ethan continued. "When the shooting shifts west, you run. Don't stop." Clara hesitated, torn between terror and something deeper, trust. Then she nodded, jaw set. "I'll pray for you," she said. He managed a faint smile. "Make it a good one." She crawled toward the stove, lifting the iron lid as silently as fear allowed. The boy clutched his wooden horse, eyes wide, but he didn't cry. He just watched Ethan like a child watching a hero in a dime novel, unaware of the cost such stories always carried. Ethan turned back to the door just as two men rushed in. He fired twice. One fell. The other screamed, clutching his shoulder, scrambling back into the night. A voice roared from outside, deep, furious. "Cole." Ethan knew that voice. Silas Caldwell stepped into the doorway, framed by firelight, long coat flapping in the wind. His eyes were cold, calculating, the eyes of a man who never believed in mercy because he'd never needed it. "You always were stubborn," Silas said, leveling his rifle. "Should have stayed dead." Ethan raised his gun. "You don't get to decide who I am anymore." Silas laughed. "This ain't about who you are, it's about what you owe." "I paid my debts," Ethan said. "In blood, not enough." They fired almost together. Ethan felt the impact like a sledgehammer, pain blooming white-hot across his side. He staggered but stayed on his feet, adrenaline holding him upright through sheer will. Silas cursed as his own shot went wide. Behind Ethan, the trapdoor closed with a soft thud. Clara and the boy were gone. Gunfire climbed the cabin wall now, licking at the roof beams. Smoke rolled thick and choking. Silas stepped closer, boots crunching over broken glass. "You could have ridden with us again," he said. "Could have been rich." Ethan coughed, blood warm against his ribs. "I was already poor," he said. "Just didn't know it." They circled each other, guns raised. The world narrowed to breath and flame. Silas sneered. "You think saving one woman and a brat makes you clean?" Ethan's voice was steady despite the pain. "No. But it makes me right." A shot rang out from the trees. Silas jerked, surprise flashing across his face as blood bloomed on his shoulder. Another shot followed, then another. Sheriff's whistles cut through the night. Silas spun toward the sound, shouting orders, but panic rippled through his men as riders burst from the darkness, badges glinting in firelight. Red Hollow had finally come. Silas glared at Ethan one last time. "This ain't over." He vanished into the trees as the remaining gunmen scattered. Ethan sagged against the wall, the world spinning. Flames crackled above him. His strength drained fast now that the fight was done. Through the smoke, he heard a child's voice, distant and terrified. "Mr. Cole," Ethan tried to answer. Darkness closed in instead. And as the burning cabin groaned and collapsed behind him, Ethan Cole fell into the snow, his fate hanging between the life he'd saved and the sins that still demanded payment. Snow fell softly on the ruins of the cabin, hissing as it met dying embers. The fire had eaten its fill and moved on, leaving behind blackened timbers and the quiet aftermath that always followed violence. Dawn crept over the Wyoming foothills, pale and fragile, as if unsure whether it was welcome. Ethan Cole did not feel the cold. He drifted in and out of consciousness, the world reduced to blurred shapes and distant sounds: boots, crunching snow, low voices, a horse snorting somewhere close. Pain pulsed through his side, deep and relentless, but beneath it was something else. Peace, the strange, weightless calm of a man who had finally stopped running. A face appeared above him. "Easy now," someone said. "Don't move." Ethan's eyes focused slowly. Clara knelt beside him, her coat pulled tight against the morning chill, soot smudged across her cheek. Her hands were steady as she pressed a cloth to his wound. "You're supposed to be gone," he murmured. She shook her head, eyes shining. "You don't get rid of us, that is." Behind her stood the sheriff and 2 deputies, rifles slung low, expressions solemn. The Caldwell gang had fled into the hills. Silas Caldwell himself was wounded and on the run, but his reign over Red Hollow was broken. The law, slow as it often was, had arrived just in time. Ethan tried to sit up and failed. Clara gently pushed him back down. "Don't," she said. "Doctor's on his way. You lost a lot of blood." He closed his eyes, shame and relief twisting together in his chest. "They'll hang me," he whispered, "soon as I can stand." The sheriff cleared his throat. "There's warrants out on you," he admitted. "That's true." Clara looked up sharply. "But," the sheriff continued, "there's also 6 dead men who won't be robbing or killing anyone else, and a dozen witnesses willing to say you stood your ground so a woman and her child could live." Ethan opened his eyes. "That don't erase what I did." "No," the sheriff said. "But it counts for something." The doctor arrived and worked in silence, stitching flesh and binding ribs. Every pull of the needle drew a sharp breath from Ethan, but he didn't complain. Pain felt honest, deserved. By midday, he was moved to a wagon and taken into Red Hollow, not in chains, but under watch. Townsfolk lined the street, their faces a mix of fear, curiosity, and something softer. Respect, perhaps. Or gratitude they didn't yet know how to name. Days passed. Ethan healed slowly in the jailhouse infirmary, watched over by the sheriff and visited daily by Clara and her son, Jacob. The boy brought his wooden horse and placed it carefully on the windowsill, as if guarding the man who had guarded him. One evening, as the sun bled red across the plains, the sheriff returned with folded papers. "The judge agreed to hear your case," he said. "Given your cooperation, and what you did out there, sentence is commuted." Ethan searched his face. Meaning you'll work," the sheriff replied. "For the county, fixing fences, guarding cattle, honest miles." Ethan exhaled, something tight in his chest finally loosening. "I can do that, I know," the sheriff said, then paused. "Silas Caldwell was found 2 days ago. Didn't make it." The ghost Ethan had been running from for years finally laid itself down. Spring came gentle and green. Ethan worked from sunup to sundown, hands raw, back aching, but soul lighter than it had ever been. On Sundays, he walked out to Clara's rebuilt cabin, a simpler place now, stronger for having been broken once. They spoke often, sometimes in words, sometimes in the shared silence of people who understood loss. One evening, as the sky burned gold and purple, Clara stood beside him on the porch. "You stayed," she said. He nodded. "I figured I'd try earning something I was given for free." She smiled, then small, real. "You don't owe me anything," she said, repeating the words that had started it all. Ethan looked out over the land, over the long road stretching toward the horizon. "I know," he replied. "That's why I'm still here." Inside, Jacob laughed, the sound carrying out into the open air. The West did not forgive easily, but sometimes, just sometimes, it allowed a man to become more than his past. And as the sun dipped low and the light caught the scar along Ethan Cole's face, he tipped his hat to the coming night, not as an outlaw, not as a hero, but as a man finally at peace,